Hello my lovely nerds and welcome back. I hope you're looking forward to another video where we get very nerdy about science in a fantasy setting. We're still on the world building, and today's video we're going to be looking at the evolution of dwarves. No, elves, obviously elves. This is obviously Legolas, who is looking very inappropriate. Legolas, put some clothes on. I frankly feel a little bit sorry for the hobbits because, you know, if they were around this level, then they must have been seeing way too much. So we're going to be using the lovely Legolas here to explore how elves evolved over time. Now, I can hear what some of you are saying. You're going, wait, is this woman crazy? Does she really think that elves evolved? And obviously, no, I don't. But the point is that when you've created a fantasy world, then you need to make it seem realistic. You need to have these species that make sense in the context of the world that you've created. But it's more than that too. If you understand how a creature evolved, then this gives you, the author, a lot of signposts to use along the way to help guide your creation of the culture and the society that these species live in. So getting to grips with the evolution of your species can help a lot in that sense too. Let's get a bit stereotypical about these tall, pointy-eared, long-lived, slow-breeding, great vision and great hearing individuals. My first question would be, what did elves evolve from? Obviously, there's lots of different stories out there with elves evolving from different races, so this is really a question for you as the world builder of your own world and your own elven race. You can have them evolve from whatever you want. Let's go with humans for this because that's going to be easiest for me to explain. Say you had a human evolving into an elf. Well, biologically speaking, there is a tendency for creatures that are preyed upon to develop excellent hearing. The reasoning being that you can hear a predator coming sooner. That means you could potentially get out the way, save yourself, let everyone else die. It's fine. Just you need to survive, and your excellent hearing ability will help you do that. So if we have a human evolving into an elf, we're going from a creature with average hearing to a creature with excellent hearing. Well, this would imply that there was a selective factor encouraging this development of better hearing. Potentially there was a creature in the environment that was preying on the soon-to-be elves, and that encouraged them to develop this better sense of hearing. But what about the elves' eyesight? Elves have fantastic vision. It's part of why I love to play an elf when I'm playing D&D, because their night vision means I'm not going to get trapped in the middle of a dungeon somewhere. Very useful skill. Interestingly enough, creatures with better vision tend to have that because they are predators. Birds of prey are a prime example of this. The ability to see their prey from a distance means that they can make the approach a lot more easily, make the attack in a way that the prey won't be able to get away. More food for the predator, more energy for making babies. Cool. Now this is quite interesting when it comes to world building because it gives you something to springboard off of. You can potentially add some predators to the environment. Make it so your elves aren't the be-all and end-all when it comes to badassery in the world. Alright, moving on to another feature. The lovely long-legged heightness of our elves. How did that evolve? Taller animals require more resources to be tall. Being tall is actually quite resource intensive. Obviously, there are advantages to this. Think giraffes. The taller you are, the more you can reach up high when it comes to foraging. But the important thing to take into account here is what this must have meant for the environment that the elves evolved in. I think Tolkien got it spot on when he put elves in the woods because being tall, it's very unlikely that they would have evolved in underground means like the dwarves did. Tolkien recognised that the environment of a species is very important for the evolution of that culture. So when it comes to building your worlds, try to bear that in mind. When you have great open savannas, you can afford to have larger creatures in those environments than you can in smaller spaces. Moving on, immortality. They're not really immortal, but they live very long lives. Although there are some creatures in the world that do live extraordinarily long lives, far longer than we humans, none do live quite as long as the elves are said to live. You know, we're talking thousands of years for their lifespan. So how is it that elves could have evolved to have such long lives? You know, when we get to a point in life where potentially our mental capacity has diminished so much that any wisdom that we have gathered over the course of our lives and that we're using to help look after the next generation is starting to fade from us, that's when we tend to die, because At that point, we've become more of a burden to the next generation, and that's decreasing the chances of our offspring going on and successfully reproducing. So what way could the elves have actually evolved to outlive other species like this? Well, there's quite a few interesting things that must have happened. Other aging processes must have been decreased biologically speaking. So that's things like their DNA must be better at healing itself, at repairing itself, so that the types of damage that normally accrue just going through life, aging-wise, don't actually occur. It's obvious to see what the evolutionary advantages of that could be. You live longer, you can provide more wisdom to your family, you can basically help make it so that the next generation have a better chance at survival. There's a really interesting element here because most of the elven species I've read about, maybe they'll only have a couple of children over the course of their lives, which is quite odd really when you think about a creature that lives for such an extreme length of time. Why would they not just go for global domination through procreation? Like bunnies. There's plenty of advantages of having lots of children. It means you have a greater chance of your genetic information being passed on to the next generation. So this to me suggests there was a big evolutionary pressure preventing this from happening. Potentially a lack of resources available to support such a large population. Imagine a situation where you had two populations of elves. One are very slow breeding elves that we have come to know and love, has a couple of children every 1,000 years. Cool. Then you have the others who are much faster in their procreation, popping out one every couple of years. Boom, 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 elves everywhere. This means that you have a huge population that would explode here. And you can easily imagine the fighting that would ensue. Fighting for food to stop starvation, fighting for other elves to procreate with. There is a potential scenario where this elf population implodes because of the lack of resources available, leaving the other elf population to become dominant over time purely because it didn't kill itself off. All of this set aside, this is a fantasy video, so you could also come up with a fantasy reason in your world why the population is limited. It doesn't have to be a lack of resources. You could have it that there could be a limit on the number of elven souls out there to be incorporated into the bodies of these elves, so there's a natural top end of the number of elves that could ever exist, and it's only when one dies that another can be born. You could come up with whatever reason for your elf population being limited. This is only a tool by which to identify these ways that you can potentially build up your world. And of course, there is the role that culture could play in the evolution of this trait. Instead of it being that the elves are naturally limited to have only a couple of offspring over 1,000 years, potentially it could be a legal reason. Do you have a ruler who is very strict? That's all I have time for in today's videos. Maybe you found that interesting. I hope you did. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed it. At the very least, I hope it encourages you to think about how you can incorporate evolution into the creation of your fantasy species and letting the evolution show you ways that you can build up your story in different ways. I'll be back again next week with another video about the ways that science can be incorporated into world building with all sorts of tips and tricks that will help you create a more realistic world and just have fun with your world building. All right, see you guys next week. Bye.